All right, guys. So this week we are going to, for today and tomorrow, review a couple of things that we did already in the beginning of the year, that being the midpoint formula. And tomorrow you'll see us review the distance formula. And then that will help because then we'll keep going with some other things that have to do with circles that utilize midpoint and distance formula. So we thought it'd be a good idea to recap. So just to recap, because this is fairly simple, the midpoint formula, which we talked about in the beginning of the year. If these are two given endpoints and we're looking for the midpoint essentially comes out to be the average or the mean of the numbers for x and y. So you take x1 and add it to x2, then divide by 2. And then you do the same thing for y, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we can try that here. If I want to find the midpoint here, I'm going to add x1 and x2, so negative 5 and negative 1. So I'll go negative 5 plus negative 1, divide that by 2. And then I'll do the same thing for the y, 6 plus negative 2. 6 plus negative 2 and divide that by 2. So that will give me negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6 over 2. 6 plus negative 2 is negative 4 over 2. And so my midpoint is going to be at negative 3, negative 2. And do the same thing here. Negative 10 plus 6. Again, my x's. Please don't confuse this and add negative 10 and negative 5. That's a very common mistake. And then add 6 and negative 1. You want to add the x's together and then the y's together. Okay, divide that by 2. And then we do the same thing for the y's. Negative 5 plus negative 1 and divide that by 2. So negative 10 plus 6 is negative 4. Negative 5 plus negative 1 is negative 6. We get something similar here. Negative 2, negative 3 is our midpoint. Okay. Now, the other type of problem that you will see is what happens if you know the midpoint and only one of the endpoints and you need to find the other endpoint. Well, for that, we can just go back and plug things into the equation. Right? I know that the midpoint for x, for example, is going to equal x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And I know the same thing for y. The midpoint coordinate for y is going to equal y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So I can substitute those things in here. Well, I know the midpoint for x. What is the midpoint for x? It's 7. So 7 equals, well, what about the x's here? Let's see. Well, x1 could be negative 3 plus, I don't know what the other x is. I divide that by 2. Well, in order to solve this equation, I just go ahead and multiply both sides by 2. So I'll get 14 equals negative 3 plus x2. And then I can add 3 to both sides. And I'll get 17 equals x2. So my x coordinate here is going to be 17. I can do the same thing for y. I know that the midpoint is 4. And that equals 9 plus y2 divided by 2. Multiply both sides by 2. I get 8 equals 9 plus y2. I go ahead and I subtract 9 from both sides to isolate y. And I get negative 1 equals y2. So the coordinates for this endpoint are going to be xy or 17, negative 1. And you can look at this inherently too. If the numbers are easy enough, you can kind of look at this and say, okay, well, if I know that the midpoint is the middle of the 2 points, so it's equidistant from both endpoints, so I know that 4 is in the middle and 9 is at the end. Well, 9 is 5 away from 4, so that the other midpoint also has to be 5 away from 4. Well, 5 away from 4 is negative 1. You can do the same thing here with the x's. It gets a little bit more difficult with the x's, or with the negatives rather. How far away is negative 3 from 7? Well, negative 3 from 7, that's 10 away, which means the other endpoint also has to be 10 away. Well, 10 away from 7 is 17, so you can do it that way as well. Okay, we'll use the formula here for this last one. Okay, and I'll plug things in. My midpoint here for x is negative 7. And that equals negative 4 plus x over 2. Multiply both sides by 2. Get negative 14 equals negative 4 plus x. I add 4 to both sides. I get negative 10 equals x. Follow the same thing for y. Negative 8 equals 6 plus y over 2. Multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of this denominator, because these cancel out. Negative 16 equals 6 plus y. Subtract 6 from both sides, and I get negative 22 equals y. So my coordinates here are negative 10, negative 22, and these are coordinates for the endpoint. Again, I can look at this to verify. Let's see, how far away is negative 8 from 6? Well, negative 8 away from 6 is 14 away. Well, what else is 14 away from negative 8? Negative 22. Same idea, how far away is negative 4 from negative 7? Well, it's negative 3 away. Well, what's negative 3 away from negative 7? It's also negative 10.